Hello, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Knicks Film School pregame show. My name is Andrew Claudio, aka GMAC. It is time to preview another Knicks matchup, this time on Friday night at Madison Square Garden against Julius Randle, Dante DiVincenzo, and the Minnesota Timberwolves. This 10-day stretch of homecomings between, I guess, Emmanuel Quickley and RJ Barrett did technically make another trip back to Madison Square Garden last Wednesday. We obviously saw what happened when Isaiah Hartenstein returned to New York last Friday, and after an eventful preseason matchup between the Knicks and Timberwolves right after the blockbuster trade that involved Karl Anthony Towns happened over the summer. These teams will now face off in the regular season with so much happening since then on both sides, including a matchup in which the Knicks already went to Minnesota and Cat was able to have his homecoming against the Timberwolves, and it went one way. Well, now we'll see what happens on the other end when Julius and Dante come back to New York. And joining me to preview all of it, what should be a very fun matchup from the Minnesota Star Tribune, returning guest, Mr. Chris Hine. Chris, welcome back to Knicks Film School.
Thanks for having me, Andrew. Good to see you again.
Good to see you too. You made the trek up to New York. Well, I guess over to New York a little early. I look forward to reading your coverage of this game, and more specifically, whatever question you get to ask a shirtless Anthony Edwards, and eventually those questions making it onto social and it being the talk of every. I gotta say, since the Knicks played the Timberwolves in Minnesota, and I've mentioned this on the pod, so people are hearing this again, but my algorithm has just become very Timberwolves heavy. Like
Really?
the way that game went and the questions it seemed to spur out of Minnesota. I between you and Dane Moore and Jace and John Krasinski, like all the quotes start to show their way into my timeline. And then the creativity of Wolves Twitter or Wolves Blue Sky just finds their way into my in front of me, specifically some conversations about Julius Randle, which we'll all get to. And it leads to my first question. And the Wolves had won 6 out of 7 when Cat made that return to Minnesota, and then he goes for 40 and 20. The Knicks blow out the Timberwolves in that game, and it seemed like the vibes considerably reversed in that stretch. And now they're a middling's not the right word, but like they're struggling to be anything above around a 500 team. How are the vibes in Minnesota, both from the locker room standpoint and from your perspective, from the fan base standpoint?
Well, I think, I mean, social media is always, you have to take it with a grain of salt because it's social media. It's
right.
It's not totally representative of how everybody feels, but the vibe on social media, anytime they lose a game, can't be worse. It's like the sky is always falling. Fire the coach, trade Julius, trade this guy. You know,
hold on. Are you sure you're not covering the 2022 Knicks?
Well, here, the next thing I was going to say, why did they sign Rudy Gobert to an extension? You know, like all these questions start to pop up every time they lose a game. And it's been a weird year. Like you mentioned that stretch before they were playing the Knicks. They went through basically, like, I don't know if it was like 3-4 weeks, whatever it was, where they lost 3 games, then they won 3 games. Then they lost 3 games, then they won 3 games. It was these 3-game streaks that just kind of flipped on their head. And the end result was like 12 straight games where they're 6-6. And quite frankly, that's who they've been this year. They've been a 500 team. That is who they are halfway through the season, essentially. They're still figuring things out. I don't know at what point, and that's kind of what we've been asking Chris Finch all along, is like, at what point do you stop saying we're still trying to figure things out to going to this isn't working? At what point do you hit that button, right? And I think that's kind of where they're at right now, is can you get this going in a more consistent way on a night-to-night basis that they haven't been able to do yet, whether it's the starting lineup. You know, they made the change a few games ago, 5-6 games ago, whatever it was, where DiVincenzo replaced Conley in the starting lineup. And I think they've been, I want to say 5-2 since then or something like that. I'm not sure of the record there. And Dante's played really well of late, especially last night against the Warriors. He had a really good game. So, you know, he struggled a bit to start the season, but he's really come around for them. But as a whole, this team is just so up and down. It's maddening to fans.
So the interesting thing about the button that you said that Chris Finch has to press if things aren't going right. And look, the league pass teams that I usually subscribe to have something to do with former Knicks. Like last year, it was a lot of Raptors. Like I just wanted to see how RJ and Quickly were doing, and like at times this year, it was like check in with the Raptors, check in like see how Quentin Grimes is doing over in Dallas, and the Timberwolves have just become the second team that I've watched. I know a lot of Knicks fans are just like, let's check in on how things are going in Minnesota. And to your point about the three up, three down, that it seemed to happen after that stretch. Like they have that losing streak after that began with Cat coming in and having the performance he did in his homecoming. Then they get this win on Christmas in Dallas that I don't think a lot of people saw them having. Understanding Luka got hurt, but after Luka got hurt, the Wolves actually like the Mavericks made a comeback.
Almost lost that game.
Almost.
Yeah.
Then there's the comeback win against Houston that seemed to be like that would spring them into some kind of winning streak. And then they had another 3-game losing streak after that, culminating in a loss to the Pistons. I guess the curiosity I have, and you would know this better from being behind the scenes, like how much is it wearing on the players? And like I guess this can kind of lead. I've read the quotes and I've seen how open Ant can be and some of the things Dante and Rudy Gobert have said. But how much do you sense the still trying to figure it out wearing on the locker room, especially when they see going on with Cat in New York?
I don't think it wears on the players as much as it does the fans.
Okay.
Because players have been through this in their careers, especially the veteran ones, right? They've been on teams that have struggled. They've been on teams that have found their stride halfway through a season. So, a lot of guys in the locker room, I think they're still in the vibes are not bad. I'll put it that way. At least that's the sense I get, right? I think the Wolves can handle success and failure maybe a little better. Like I do think that there is a tendency to, maybe get a little comfortable when they win a couple games, right? And relax, a little bit of human nature sliding in there. And if they lose a game like they lost last night, you have to be able to move on quickly and not think about these things about, the fit or the starting lineup isn't working. So, you can't let it affect you the next night out. So I think they've done a decent job of that. But last season's team, one of the things that defined that team was its ability to move on quickly when things did get bad. They never had more than a 2-game losing streak until the playoffs. And, this team has already had multiple losing streaks that have extended past 2 games. So I don't know what it is about this team that they're just not able to kind of put, a bad Monday night in the past when they play Wednesday night or a bad week in the past. But this team just hasn't shown as quite an ability to move on from a bad night as last year's team did for whatever reason, even though it's a lot of the same players.
And if I remember right, their only 3-game losing streak last year being in the playoffs was like their last 3-game losing streak because it was 3-0 to the Mavericks, and then
they lost. They lost 3
history.
Yeah, they lost 3 straight to the Nuggets in that series. They were up 2-0, then it went 3-2.
That's
Denver,
right. Okay,
and
that's right.
Won the series, and then they lost the first 3 to Dallas. So yeah, those were the only 3-game losing streaks they had all last season. And I think with Cat, there's always a little bit of revisionist history that takes place when things like this happen. You can go back in Wolves Twitter or in the comments section of our website and there were plenty of people that were asking the Wolves to trade Cat back in the day. Plenty of people. And now that he's gone and, kind of and thriving in New York, it's why did we ever trade Cat? But there were some of the same people that were in commenters and people like that saying, we got to trade Cat. We got to trade Cat. He's making too much money over all these years. We got to trade Cat. So, I think, and now it's just funny to kind of see the reaction as he's thriving in New York and having a great year, you don't know what you had until it's gone, I guess, right?
That does beg the follow up that the emphasis to trade Cat was is the response that you're seeing. It's less about like, I can't believe you traded Cat, and it's more like, I can't believe you traded Cat for Julius Randle. Like, is it more of a frustration with what Julius has been so far?
I think that's part of it. Like, if the Wolves were winning and they were a great team, I don't think anybody's complaining about the Cat trade, right? Like, if they're in the same position that they were a season ago, nobody's, even Cat having the season that he's having, I don't think people would be that upset about it. It is the fact that you did have, arguably the greatest season in franchise history. That tells you, Timberwolves franchise history. A trip to the conference finals qualifies as that. And then you trade an all-star player from that roster. So you see the frustration, you sense the frustration. I think everybody thought coming into the season, okay, they're going to run it back. They're going to, keep the chips in the middle of the table for this year and see what happens, right? And when you make that move and you take a noticeable step back, it's frustrating because then fans just see, it was money, it was this, it was that, and it was frustrating coming off of such a great year where, I've never covered a year quite like it, where, it was, I don't want to say it was like a magical season. It wasn't, because it ended in the conference finals, but like it was a fun season to cover. It was a fun season for the fans to watch, a fun team to follow, a fun locker room to be in. And it's gone out the window this year in that sense, for sure.
And with the parity in the NBA, I can't blame a Wolves fan that isn't looking at last year as a what if. Like, understanding the Celtics were waiting for you, but you probably, I'll just personally say, like, you definitely would have given a better fight against the Celtics than whatever Dallas did. As someone who predicted Celtics in 5, I just need to throw that out there. That I looked at that series as much. This is the Celtics, who have one of the best best net ratings ever against the 5 seed. So I can't fault any Wolves fan for being, thinking that it's a missed opportunity, especially looking at what the NBA is this year, understanding what OKC is, understanding what Cleveland is. It looks like we're going to have a new champion this year, unless Boston just decides to flip a switch come playoff time. The next direction I want to go here is, it's somewhat about you and somewhat about your profession, if I may. Sure. It's a two-parter, and the first one is going to be around Anthony Edwards. Now, I may have some knowledge that someone's writing a book about Anthony Edwards, which, if that person wants to plug said book, he absolutely is allowed to.
I wish I had a pre-order link to send to people, but keep it on your radar. Follow me on social media if you're interested in reading Ant's story, both from his time before the NBA and in the NBA as well. We have a book coming out in the spring. Very excited about it. We're putting the finishing touches on it now, and hopefully in the coming weeks we'll have the links, we'll have the cover, we'll have the title, we'll have all that good stuff to come. So keep that on your radar if you're a basketball fan or an Ant fan from afar as a Knicks fan. And Carl will be featured in the book, so there is that.
There you go.
There is that. So there's a reason to pick it up.
Yeah, our summers are spent interviewing people that wrote books usually, so we'll have to have you back on during the summer after we've had a chance to deep dive it. Covering Anthony Edwards, we'll start there. And I come from, well, I guess as a Knicks fan, watching the Knicks and seeing, how the Knicks answer questions, how Tibbs seems to like to prefer a tighter ship. I'm sure you know this from your time covering Tibbs when he was in Minnesota.
Yeah.
And, Josh Hart a couple days ago mentioned something for the second time about how we need to be selfless and put away our agendas and our egos and go out there and play as a team. And it could be looked at as just interview talk, but it got aggregated. It's like, oh, who's he talking about? Who's he referring to? And we're reading into the things that certain Knicks players say and certain things Tibbs says, because we don't ever get a direct answer. Anthony Edwards is sitting there and literally telling you our starting 5 is terrible. We stink, and is an open book. And I'm curious, as a journalist where you usually have to dig for stuff like that, what is it like to cover a player that seems to just be literally an open book when it comes to how he feels about each basketball game.
From a journalistic perspective, you're always grateful when players are that candid, right? Like, because that's what you want at the end of the day. You want people's honest opinions, honest thoughts, how open they are. I remember the Wolves had a game against Sacramento this year, and that was one of the times that Ant kind of went viral for the stuff he said about how we couldn't, that was the night he said the Wolves couldn't talk to each other, things like that, like their communication was really poor. And I remember like that night, we're waiting for him by the locker, and he comes and he sees like the kind of group, 6 or 7 of us that are kind of waiting for him. And he says, what you guys want to talk to me? And we're like, yeah. And he's like, what you want to know, why we're trash?
Just volunteers.
And so, so he sits down, we turn the recorders on. And so my first question to him was, all right, so why are you trash? And he started laughing, and then he got into his whole thing. Like, you can have that kind of give and take with him that you can't necessarily have with a lot of other players. It's just that personality of his always kind of shines through, even amid a tough losing streak. And that's one of the reasons why he's a leader on this team, and guys love playing with him, is because even when times get tough, he is a positive force and somebody that you want to be around in the grueling 82 game stretch of a season. So it's very refreshing from our perspective to cover that. One thing I'll say about Tibbs in covering him, and Julius as well, it's like they're still very professional at the end of the day, even if they're not as maybe open or as candid as Ant is. They're still very professional. It's not like it's bad to deal with them. You know what I mean?
Right.
Or that they treat you poorly or whatever. They're still very professional, and you could still interview them, have a conversation with them, and they're very professional. And at the end of the day, you also just want that out of an interaction. You want, and I've had some people in my career, you don't want people that are unprofessional and and kind of look down on you or look at you a certain way because you're a reporter. Like Tibbs, Julius, like guys like that, they're never like that.
So you're actually answering my second question to an
extent, because I knew that was where we were going.
The Anthony Edwards openness of how he answers questions or he does his media availability. And the thing I have noticed as my algorithm has become more Timberwolves heavy is I never see a Julius video going around. Not to say he doesn't talk to the media, but I guess, do you get this sense? Because the last time when I talked to Dane Moore, it was very Dante heavy, very Cat heavy. I have a rooting interest in Julius Randle. I was following his career, especially his rise from like journeyman power forward to all NBA power forward with the Knicks. I wanted it to succeed here, and I want it to succeed in Minnesota. So like what's the sense you get from Julius, who probably keeps his more real answers closer to the chest, especially compared to what Ant is, and how he's adjusted to life in Minnesota so far this year, especially with the way struggles have gone?
I still think that, there's a strong relationship between him and Chris Finch dating back to their time in New Orleans. I will say Julius was very honest, that you mentioned that Christmas game. That was the first time he really opened up about the changes that he's trying to make with the Wolves and what they're asking him to do and how they're asking him to play. And Chris Finch has reemphasized that in recent weeks. So that was the first time we heard Julius really open up about the challenges that he's faced since coming to Minnesota and adjusting to the roster. And look, he's having, he's shooting way less than he did when he was with the Knicks, and they're asking him to be more of a distributor, more of a playmaker. And they're I think they're trying to mold his game into, less of what fans don't want to see, which is the dribble for 12 seconds on a possession sort of stuff, right? And then it ends with a missed shot or a turnover, right? I think the Wolves they're trying to get his game to a little bit less of that and more playing within the structure and flow of how they want to play. And it's tough. It's been an adjustment, but he's been willing to buy in, to try to change and try to mold himself into how they want to play and vice versa. as well. So it's been a give and take. It's been hard. He's been honest about how hard it has been and how challenging it has been. And that's where you see the NBA is all about consistency. It's how consistent can you be on a night in, night out basis, getting to the highest level of your ability and performance. And that's where you see it. It's just not consistent enough right now for this team to be more than a 500 team. Like, there's good nights, there's bad nights. And right now they're coming at about a 50-50 clip, the good nights and the bad nights. So that's just where they're at. That's where Julius is at. And that's why you hope, if you're the Wolves, that somewhere in this next 20 games or whatever, you find whatever the formula is, you find it, right? And they've been here before. They were here 2 years ago trying to fit Cat next to Rudy, right? And Cat got hurt that season and was out for about 50 games. But when he came back, they were still searching for how they were going to play with these two next to each other. They were searching through the playoffs. And Finch has said even 2 years ago, they finally started to find something with Cat and Rudy in the playoffs against Denver when they lost in the first round 2 years ago. And that carried over into the next season. I don't know what that means for this season in terms of this roster and this roster construction. But from that perspective with Julius, they've been here before where they have had to have patience making such a big change fit. And the organization and Finch, they had that patience 2 years ago, and it's a matter of, do they have it again? And, we'll see what's out there. Listen, the deadline, you never know what's going to happen, right? It's unpredictable. But at the end of the day, you have to keep trying, because odds are, I shouldn't say odds are, but like, Julius Randle may be on this team post deadline, right? And so you got to make it work the rest of the season if you're trying to make a run in the playoffs. So you got to keep hammering away at it.
So you did it again, where you're answering a question that I was about to ask. And look, it is the probably most fascinating thing about the Timberwolves, because when they had that year where Cat got hurt and they didn't, that was missed time to try and figure out the Rudy Cat dynamic. And then obviously we saw what it was last year with a 56-win team that made the conference finals. You could say that worked, but it was like them putting the nuclear button and trading Cat was a choice they made. The Julius Randle situation may resolve itself with the player option this year. And like, there's no telling how long this experiment with Julius on the team could potentially go, which is why my question is in regards to this deadline. And I guess your projection going forward. Do you see Julius Randle as a long-term piece of the Minnesota Timberwolves?
I don't know. That's my honest
Do you
answer.
think anybody knows? That's the question. Do you think anybody in the Timberwolves?
I don't know. I honestly, I don't know. I really don't. I don't know if he knows. I don't know if the front office. I just don't know. There's so much unknown right now. And it does relate to how the trade market shapes up too, and it's just, I just don't know. Yeah. I wish I could sit here and say one way or the other. But that is the biggest question right now facing this Wolves team now and into the future, is what happens with Julius and his player option, and do they sign him long-term for how much money? What does it look like relative to all the various aprons, because right now they're a second apron team, which makes it difficult to trade because of all the restrictions that are in place in terms of aggregating salaries and things like that. So trying to make a move where you might, if you want to shed Julius and his salary or try to bring it down, it's hard to do because you're limited in how you're able to construct trades, right?
Yeah.
So
especially in season, to your point.
In season, right? And especially in season. Out of season, you might be able to maneuver in and around it a little better, right? With cap holds and this and that and whatever,
signing
right?
Trades,
getting creative, but in season a little trickier. I feel like that's a good point. So that makes it harder, and probably more likely that he's here post deadline than not, right? Just the ability to make a deal becomes harder. But after the season, if if Naz Reid declines his option and Nickeil Alexander-Walker becomes a free agent, and there's Dane did a great job the other day, kind of explaining the
conundrum,
the conundrum and kind of how it works if Julius opts in, if Julius opts out, what does it look like? So I recommend going and listening to Dane Moore's podcast. He did a great job kind of breaking that all down. But it kind of all starts and ends with what does Julius do and what does the team do with him going forward? And I just, sitting here on January 16th, I can't tell you one way or the other where that's going to fall.
I had someone reach out to me a day or so ago from another niche podcaster, and it was from one of the worser teams in the league. And they asked me about Julius and if they could be the team that trades for Julius Randle. And I said, like, he presented a deal that actually works under the salary restrictions. And I said, look, for your situation, he's one of the best floor raisers in the league, you know, and I think that the Randalls would love where you're talking about. I don't know what Minnesota's plans are, which is why hearing this, I don't think Minnesota knows what their plans are at the moment.
Correct.
But it's why his path to, and not even his path, just like his reputation around the league is so interesting, because it's very clear he's not like a bad player or even like a good stats bad team guy. Like last 3 years with the Knicks, and especially that we hear season, like he was the engine of a team that was consistently hosting playoff rounds. And then here we are, and a team that went to the conference finals last year is struggling to see where he fits. So I'm curious to see where Julius's career potentially goes, if in Minnesota or elsewhere. I got some people watching live, and I'd like to get to some questions if it's possible. We'll start with On Dios NYK. Chris Hine, would you say that Towns is missed in Minnesota? Someone answered that, but the second part, do you even like the trade? What was your reaction when the trade happened?
Well, first of all, I was seeing a show, and it was intermission at the show at the time. So my reaction was, I'm missing the second half of this show.
I have to work.
I have to work. That was my initial reaction, was I have to work. It's amazing
how much, like, I know I don't have the same responsibilities you do as someone who covers a team, but I was on my anniversary vacation in Vegas at Summer League. Like we went to Vegas early before people got there when the Jalen Brunson extension news happened.
Okay.
And I had to be like, hey, babe, unfortunately, I need to find a Starbucks.
Hey, babe, wake up. They just signed.
Right. Like it's very much the Brian Windhorst story of being overseas when I forget what trade happened.
Yeah, I think it was Kyrie to the Celtics, I think.
Yeah.
Was
like,
trade.
I'm going to trust my able colleagues so I can stay married.
I love Brian. And that's one of my favorite tweets of all time.
Yeah.
No, it was very much, it was very much that energy for me in that moment. I'll say that. In terms of loving the trade, I don't, as a beat reporter, I don't know how much of my opinion I'm allowed to kind of interject there. I kind of have to be careful with that stuff.
Right.
I will say, you understand where the front office is coming from in terms of the apron and the luxury tax and the flexibility to remake the roster around Ant in the future, because ultimately that is what this trade was. It was a signal for the next 5 years that they have to be able to build a winner around Ant. And I wrote this at the time. It was one of the things I wrote when I went into work now mode that night, which was the way that the Wolves would ever lose Anthony Edwards. And he's on the first year of his 5-year, Supermax this year. So the way that Anthony Edwards would ever leave Minnesota is if there wasn't a contending team around him. Right. I don't think he's going to go chasing the bright lights of a big city. I don't think he has any interest in that. I think he's perfectly fine in Minnesota, living there. It's become home. Obviously he's beloved by the fan base. But the only way you would ever lose him is by going into a prolonged stretch where you have to bottom out for cap reasons or tax reasons or whatever. And that's how you would lose him. So the trade was made with an eye towards not necessarily this year, but next year and the year after and the year after. And we're talking about Julius's player option kind of being the next sort of pivot point or uncomfortable moment for this franchise. But they had Carl on the books for 4 years at a very high salary. So you get through this moment this year with Julius and the player option, you figure out what you're going to do, and then you're past it. And now you're looking 3-4 years into the future, whether Julius is here or not. You have a little more certainty with your books and who's here and who's not and who you can re-sign. And with Carl around, the conventional thinking around Minnesota was, if Carl was still on the team, then you have to say goodbye to Naz Reid. You have to say goodbye to Nickeil Alexander-Walker, who have become, two very important players for this team and this franchise over the last couple of years. And so that was part of the thinking as well, as I think that trade was an attempt, again, with an eye toward the future of keeping Naz Reid, maybe keeping Nickeil Alexander-Walker, and maintaining depth. And I know that the Wolves really coveted Dante. That was the tipping point of the trade, obviously. So bringing him in here, having depth in a time where depth is hard to come by in the NBA, especially if you're an apron team, first or second apron, having that kind of depth was also something that they valued. So that was their thinking, for better or for worse, whether you agree or disagree. It was a long-term depth plan.
Yeah. The pod I just did on Monday previewing the Pistons with Bryce Simon, we landed on the same conclusion that organizations, once they see that they have a guy, like obviously the Knicks, when they realized what Brunson was, like every move they made after that was around how do we maximize what Jalen Brunson can be. Okay, let's go get everybody he played with in college. Let's go get a stretch five. Let's go get his like best friends, from so he can start podcasts and whatnot. And that was centered around that. And the Pistons are very much trying to do that around Cade, which is why you've seen like Tim Hardaway Jr. and Tobias Harris, Malik Beasley. My God, but he's been in Detroit this
Wolves
year.
fans are very familiar with Malik Beasley. Yep.
That's right. So I guess the similar philosophy is what the Cat trade was. Understanding, Cat probably would have made you a better team this year coming off of conference finals. The thinking long term about Ant is like we've prioritized that we have a guy, and we're going to try and make sure that he is maximized as much as possible. You sort of answered this next question, but I am curious because there are many Knicks fans that miss Dante, and there's definitely a portion that I subscribe to that, like, if there was any world where the Timberwolves were okay with Julius and any other piece that didn't go to Villanova or be OG Anunoby, the Knicks would be like 36. Would be the Cavs right now. It'd be 36-5. But because they had to give up Dante, that took away one piece from their depth lineup, or their depth that's got them in the position they're in now. So Stan Brad 13 asked, do the Wolves fans see Dante as a long-term core piece? And if you want to, not just Wolves fans, but do the Wolves specifically consider Dante like a long-term piece? I assume I know the answer. And
they do.
Okay.
They really wanted him in free agency when the Knicks got him.
That's right.
It was the reason they made the trade in the first place. So the team definitely sees him as a long-term piece. Yes.
Gotcha.
100%. He's starting now. It was a rough start. And fans, so the fans, so quote unquote social media, whatever, they were kind of down on Dante. Does he even want to be here? They traded him away from his friends, this and that, the whole thing, right?
Might have been a fair question to ask. Yeah.
But the whole time I'm sitting there thinking, I've seen this before with players, especially a trade so late in the ball game, like that one was right before training camp opens, right? Your life turns upside down. New team, new systems, moving your family, all that stuff, right? I've seen this before. Give it time. You got to be patient. And even under Chris Finch, there have been guys that have come in. Like I always use the example of Taurean Prince in his first year playing for Chris Finch a few years ago. Was under 30%, I think, from 3-point range for half the season. And then the second half of the season, he became such a valuable player for them. Over 40% from 3-point range, helped them get into the playoffs, was a very valuable member of two straight playoff teams for them from that point onward. Sometimes it just takes 20 to 30 games, especially when you change scenery like that so late in the game, to figure it out. And now I think Wolves fans are seeing the Dante they thought they were getting, and what the team sees in him as well.
To your point, when the Knicks went to Minnesota in December, Dante was shooting 35% from the field, 32% from three, and actually played garbage time during the fourth quarter of that game.
Remember that?
And it seemed like it was just, hey, go get some shots up.
We're going to use
this to go get some shots up. And he went 3 of 6 in that game. Since that game, or with that game included, it's a 15-game sample, 6 of which he's been a starter, 7.9 3-point attempts per game over that stretch, is shooting 44% from 3. So we're starting to see the Dante that we saw last year. The next one from Kevin Danishevsky. Can you explain the origins of the cat is soft reputation?
I have a lot of thoughts about that one. I mean, I think it starts with Jimmy Butler. Like, I think that's where the cat is soft rep started. It was when Jimmy 7 years ago, and I remember it well because it was literally my first month on the beat. It was 7 years ago when Jimmy Butler blew up that practice that everybody loves to talk about. Then went on ESPN to basically trash Cat, trash the Wolves, trash Andrew Wiggins, and try to force his way out of town. That's basically where the cat is soft rep started. It's because of Jimmy. That would be my thought on that one.
Interesting that the year Cat may start an all-star team and potentially finish.
I am
MVP.
I am having so many flashbacks to 7 years
what's
ago.
Going
right
on
now.
in
What's going
Miami
on in Miami
right
is fascinating for me to watch from afar right now. Fascinating, because I'm like, I remember that move. I remember that move. I remember that. I remember when this story came out 7 years ago. Same wording, kind of. Like, it's all the same playbook, right?
And even more so, like, that stretch, like, Tibbs was the coach and the president of basketball operations at that time.
Yes.
And it almost was an indictment on the culture in Minnesota to an extent. Like, from what I read, it's like, you got to get Jimmy out of there. Like, it's Minnesota. And now he's doing it to Miami, who literally has #heat culture that we've made up over the past 2 decades.
Well, it's interesting, and to plug the book again, one of the things that I end up doing in the book is, because maybe it's just because my time started with the Jimmy trade, I kind of begin the story of the Timberwolves and how Ant ends up on the Timberwolves with that trade, because that was essentially when they traded Jimmy, it was a signal that wasn't working, and now the franchise has to head in a new direction, right? And then they fire Tibbs a few months after that, and then they bring in Gerson Rosas, who's now with the Knicks, and Gerson began the process of trying to rebuild the team, and that's how they end up with the number 1 pick in 2020. And I also just contrast, like, because Cat was there, and I contrast who Ant is to Cat compared to what Jimmy was to Cat, in terms of how open and how welcoming of a teammate Ant was, and embracing Cat, and not getting on him for being imperfect, or and embracing him for who he is, and that's kind of who Ant is at his core as a teammate, right? He's not going to get on you for your faults. He's going to embrace you for what you do well. And that's why Ant and Cat always got along. And, another thing, we were speaking about players and their professionalism, with the media and things like that. One thing I developed a very good relationship with Cat during his time, and Cat is quoted in the book. And I remember, trying to work it out with him prior to the trade about like when I was going to kind of sit down with him for the book and this and that. And then the trade happened, and I didn't know if I was going to get to talk to Cat for the book, because obviously, again, your life turns upside down, right? And Cat stuck to his word that he was going to participate and be interviewed for the book, and I did get him a few weeks later. So I'm very grateful to Cat for that. I figured I'd share that little tidbit with you guys as well.
I think the majority of Knicks fans, if you were down on the trade going in, it's just been a complete 180 with what he's been on the court, the personality he's been off the court. I'm a Mets fan, so I can't relate to this, but apparently Cat's like a gigantic Yankees fan.
He is, yes.
So
yes.
like him coming to New York as they go to the World Series.
He's also an Eagles fan, though. So
that happened. That came to a head last night.
Yeah. I saw
he was wearing Eagles gear in Philly on the Knicks bench. as a Mets fan, I take every chance I get, and a Knicks fan, obviously. I take every chance I get to laugh at the city of Philadelphia. So, on behalf of New York, I say to both Cat and Jalen Brunson and Mikal Bridges, go Rams.
Yes.
So we'll see what happens this weekend. I recognize in Minnesota, football is not the best of topics to talk about after what happened against the Rams. Two questions, and they're X's and O's related before we get out of here. From Ben Kim Gervey, was the decision to move Cat to the 4 full-time predicated on opening up Cat, or was it because he wasn't good defensively?
Oh, that's a very good question. The Wolves had always envisioned, or Finch envisioned, and then when Tim Connolly got here, they did envision a center playing next to Cat, a defensive oriented center playing next to him. I don't think they necessarily from the start envisioned that would be Rudy Gobert. I think that is kind of how that summer and that offseason played out. And then when Gobert kind of became available, they pushed their chips into the center of the table, right? I think that was always on the back burner with the Wolves. If you think back to the season before the Wolves make the Gobert trade, Cat was playing the 5. They had Jared Vanderbilt kind of playing the 4. Jaden McDaniels was still there. Taurean Prince was there. D'Angelo Russell was there. And the Wolves had I think it was like the 13th. They were 13th in defensive efficiency that year. And they played a very fly around, high wall style of defense with Cat at the 5, not in drop coverage, not really like focused on rim protection all the time, but he was guarding on the perimeter more often, right? They had the number 1 offense in the league that year from January onward with Cat playing the 5, right? And I think so it's almost like not a surprise to see, Cat's playing the 5 again. He's got Jalen Brunson there. Of course, they're going to be great offensively. Like that's Cat's natural position offensively, but it does come at a cost defensively. And so when Cat played that season, kind of in that high wall coverage, moving around the perimeter, it kind of let the front office and everybody know that, okay, well, if he plays the 4, we think he can guard well enough on the perimeter to hold his own and make it work if you bring in more of a dedicated rim protector. And that was kind of the thinking. And that's what ended up happening. And ultimately it did work out, obviously.
Yeah.
So I do think that kind of was the plan all along, especially when Tim Connolly got to Minnesota.
It's why the Mitchell Robinson angle of this Knicks season has just become so fascinating, because I think a lot of Knicks fans went into this year thinking, all right, we're going to lean into Cat at the 5 out offense. The defense will be what it is, but if he could be around top 12, top 15, we'll be okay if it's a top 1 or 2 offense, to your point. And the defense at stretches has been detrimental, especially in crunch time. Now I would agree with you. A scheme shift would be more what I'd do, whether you want to switch or just have Cat be more aggressive. The foul trouble, I'm sure I don't have to tell you this, is a thing, and he's just not as aggressive, even in drop, when he's in foul trouble. And if you're having him guard more aggressively on in drop or on the pick and roll, then the guy averaging 14 rebounds a game is no longer at the rim.
He's no longer at the rim grabbing rebounds, right? Exactly.
So
and by the way, that Wolves team did struggle rebounding that year.
The Josh Hart angle, I will say, does make me want them to try it a little more. Like the best rebounding guard in the league makes me, or forward, whatever Josh wants to call himself. Like a guy that's 6'5", averaging like 10 rebounds a game, makes me wonder if they pivot to that before any type of lineup change, but I guess we'll see. Last but not least, I think it's the most fascinating part from Knicks fans, this next question, because we went through years of no matter how Julius was playing, no matter how his game was going, he's playing the fourth quarter, and specifically down the stretch in the fourth quarter. So Cardiac Knicks says, Chris, I haven't seen much Wolves games this season, but I watched last night's game against the Warriors and noticed Julius wasn't playing. Randle wasn't playing late in the fourth quarter. Is this usually the case?
Good question again. I think it wasn't the case at the beginning of the season, but it has become the case over the last month and a half. Chris Finch has really changed how he approaches end of game lineups this season. He is not married to the same 5 guys. He will mix it up. He will throw Naz Reid in there over Julius, as he did last night. And there are plenty of games where Julius is still in the closing lineup. It really is a night-to-night thing in terms of how they close games. And nobody is immune from sitting, except for Ant. But Ant is the only constant. Ant is basically the only constant in end-of-game situations. We've seen games where Rudy is sitting. Games where Julius is sitting. Mike Conley, Dante, Jaden. Everybody has to be ready to take a seat in the final minutes of a game on a nightly basis, and that's kind of how they've approached things. They will close with, there were games that they had like Nikhil closing and Nas closing, and so 3 bench guys were closing on a given night. So yeah, Finch has really mixed it up this year in terms of end of game lineups, and he's trying to find that right mix. Nobody's played more clutch games this year than the Minnesota Timberwolves, and I think they're below 500 right now in clutch situation games.
Yeah.
So they're searching for what the right mix is, and it's matchup dependent. Obviously, some nights, like I said, there are nights where Rudy's not out there to close games. If teams go smaller, if they think going smaller is gonna be an advantage to them. Like when they came back in that Houston game, Rudy was not a part of that comeback.
That's right.
It was Julius, Nas, I think Nikhil, Dante, and Ant were the 5 in that game that brought them back. It was open floor offense, and they got back in it. But every night's different. If we get to clutch time tomorrow night, I have no idea who's going to be closing the game.
A wise man once said, "The game will tell you what to do." I forget who said that. Oh yeah, it was Tom Thibodeau who said that, and it's something I wish he would do more often. Like last night, I thought the game was screaming for like a Sixer team that doesn't have Embiid, and he's like making sure Precious Achiuwa is closing because he needs a quote unquote center out there. And Deuce McBride had arguably his best game of the season, and like would have been a better point of attack defender on Maxey, and he's like. It seems a rigidity in that sense existed. It's just a thing I wish Tibbs would do a little more. But hats off to Finch to at least recognizing that, and we'll see Ant plus whoever for it is in crunch time on Friday night. Chris, you've been so good with your time today. Thank you so much for joining me. Before you get out of here, please plug the book one more time and plug your work where other people can find your
so just stay tuned for the book. I'll release all the details. I wish I had it to send out to people now. But yeah, Minnesota Star Tribune, check out our website. Follow me on Twitter, Blue Sky, all those places. I know you're all Knicks fans, so it's not like you're going to be subscribing for Timberwolves coverage, but if
I tell you, they're our second team this year. Absolutely.
Okay. All right. Well, subscribe, please subscribe, come on over, read my work, support local journalism, all that good stuff. So that's my pitch, and pay attention to the book. I hope people enjoy it. I hope you enjoy Kat's participation in it, reading about him and his relationship with Ant and their time together on the Timberwolves. Hopefully people will enjoy it, not just as a basketball story, but as a life story as well.
Right. Not to dox you, but you're in the Big Apple right now. Have you had a slice yet?
Yeah. Last night I went out with a friend and we've had, we had more than one slice. I'll say that.
You went to the right place. Is what it sounds like.
They were large slices. I'll say that.
Hell yeah. So, okay. Well, Chris, thank you so much for joining me. Hope you enjoy the Big Apple while you're here. And thank you to everybody for tuning in to another edition of the Knicks Film School pregame show. If you dug it, please head over to iTunes, drop a 5-star rating and a review. If you're watching on YouTube, please like this video. Remember to subscribe one more time, because this is the last piece of content we're dropping before Friday night's game. Please come with us to T Squared Social on Friday night. It's at 70 42nd Street in Midtown. But we're watching the game, this matchup between Julius and Dante against maybe Karl Anthony Towns and Jalen Brunson. We'll see what the status of Karl Anthony Towns is, but we'll be there at 6:30 for a pregame hangout beforehand. So be there or be T Squared. I'll be back probably Monday morning, not live, but with a conversation about the Atlanta Hawks before the game takes place on MLK Day at 3 p.m. But until next time, thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. Enjoy the game tonight, and I will speak with you soon. Peace.